Hi guys, my name is Julie. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over all of the books that I read in the month of August. So my stats this month, I read 15 books, 1 novella, and 1 short story. I had like a super busy month. I honestly do not know how I read this many books this month. This is probably the most that I read the entire year in the ratio of like books to the month. August was kind of like a fever dream, like it was just like a blur. I don't know. So the first book I read this month, we're actually matching, and that is Kingsbane by Claire Legrand. This is book 2 of the Imperium trilogy. This was really good. I ended up rating it a 4.5 star. This was my highest rated book of the month, and I read it first, so that kind of sucks, but it was really good. It's like about 600 pages, and I honestly did not feel bored at any point. I feel like the pacing was so good. It was so entertaining. It didn't feel like there was any filler. Anytime it felt like it was like about to get like a little bit boring, some like adventure or action started happening, and it was really entertaining. There was a lot of character development. I obviously can't say too much because this is like a sequel, like it's the second book in a series, but there's a lot of character development, both good and bad, and a lot happened. Like the ending had me so shocked. Like I literally, like my mouth was agape. Like it was so much, and it was just really good. I really enjoyed this. After Kingsbane, I read Queen of the Blazing Throne, which is a novella that comes in between the second and third book in the Imperium trilogy. I didn't even know about this novella until I went on to Libby and it was like there to like rent on my Kindle, so I rented that. And I honestly feel like this is a novella that was really helpful for me to connect to one of the like kind of like side characters. I don't think that it's necessary, but I do think if you're gonna read the third book, you might as well read this. It's about like 60 or something pages, and it's super quick, super fast paced, and it just gives you some background on like some of the characters that are not too integral to like the story itself, but do help move the plot along, especially in the end of the second book and the third book. So yeah. After that, I read My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jody Meadows. This is like a YA historical fantasy. It's kind of based off the story of Lady Jane Grey, but it's kind of like a rewriting of how her story went, but like obviously it's fantastical, so it's like fictional, but it was really entertaining. I was honestly getting 5-star feels. Like the first chapter, I was like, I need to order this book. I didn't end up doing it because I just didn't, but it was really entertaining. I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend reading this. I feel like the plot was moving so fast, but it was so entertaining. I loved the characters and their dynamics with each other. It was so entertaining, but the last 80% did feel dramatically different to me. I don't know like how it was split between the 3 authors, if like that was like one author's doing and I just didn't mesh well with it, but it did honestly feel like a lot of the characters and their decisions changed a lot, and I didn't really enjoy that part of this story. I do think the ending was like okay, like it wasn't like bad, but I just didn't really enjoy it. I feel like it was very different from like the tone of the rest of the story, so I don't know. It did heavily affect my rating, but I would still recommend this. I do think I want to order it eventually and reread it like physically, because it was really good and I would recommend it. The show is also really good. I feel like the casting was like perfect for that, and I really enjoyed the show as well. It is canceled now. If like you watch the show and you want to know like how it ends, because the show doesn't get through everything the book does, just read the book. It's really a good time. So then I read an arc that was sent to me by MG Hunt. I'm just gonna put my thing on the screen, like my feelings about it, because I feel like I've put it through the ringer. Like I've said enough about this short story, but it's basically about an explorer named Elara who is tasked with investigating a strange meteorological phenomenon, and she's sent to traverse like a perilous mountain pass. And it's basically Elara and the passing. Like it follows her and kind of like her journey through and what she finds out, what she learns, everything like that. It's very short, very sweet. I would recommend it if you like want like a little filler as like a fantasy filler. I don't know. It was enjoyable, but I don't really like short stories that much. I just don't connect to them typically. Then I finally had the stamina to go back into the Imperium trilogy and finish it with Lightbringer. I honestly was disappointed by this book. It kind of left me a little bit bored. What I said in the past few books about there being no filler, it felt super planned out, was kind of the opposite in this book. Like I think it was planned out, and obviously you need filler in a book. A book can't just be this long, but I honestly feel like so much happened in the second book, and then in this book it was just slow. Like honestly nothing really happened until like this much into the book, and I was just really bored. It was hard for me to get through. I ended up giving this a 3 stars because the ending was pretty good. I do feel a little bit let down by the ending. I feel like the main action scene, which was like the end, like how it all came together, that was really interesting, very entertaining, but everything after it like wrapped up fine. Like it wasn't a cliffhanger or anything. but there's this one aspect which I can't say because it'd be a spoiler, but that aspect was just like, that's the part that like left me like a little like, oh, like I didn't feel like super good about that ending. But I would still recommend the Imperium trilogy if it's something that sounds interesting to you. Maybe you would like this. I just felt like it was super fillery, and maybe I was just like in a little bit of a reading slump or something when I read this, but it was honestly a really good series. I feel like the characters, and like it was super planned out. The characters are very like complex, like they are morally gray. They have a lot of like stuff going on, and it's very intriguing to read about. So the next 3 books are books that I read in my reading new releases vlog, so if you want to see my full thoughts, you should totally go check that video out. I'm gonna go over these, but I'm not gonna go too in depth because I did say all my thoughts in that video already. But the first book I read was The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song. This cover is gorgeous. This is basically like a fantasy adventure inspired by The Legend of Mulan. The plot is basically like Mulan, but like with fantastical elements as well. And it's very entertaining. I feel like it was just a little bit too fast-paced because I feel like a lot of the character and plot developments that were happening didn't hit hard for me, because I was like, wow, that just like happened in like 2 pages. But it was implied that another book is going to come out in the series, so I will be reading that when it does, but I was a little bit let down. It's still a 3.75. I would still recommend this. I just think that like the pacing was like a little bit too fast for me. Then I listened to the audiobook of Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. I just feel like overall, I don't really care too much about the romance in Annabelle Monaghan's books. I've read all of her books so far that I know of, but I just feel like I don't really end up caring about the romance or the mailman character. I do enjoy like the premise of like the side plot, or like the subplot of like what the main character is going through. Usually they're a little bit older, not old, like they're like 30 or something. But when the book starts out, it follows Allie, and it's the 2-year anniversary of her mother's passing and the 1-year anniversary of when her husband asked for a divorce. So she's going through a lot, and she's not having the best of times. I feel like the plot of like her and her husband trying to figure out like what they want to do, because they've been separated but now they want to get an official divorce. I feel like that was very interesting. That was like the main part I was like interested about reading about, but it was like a subplot. Like the romance was definitely more of the plot because it is a book about like a summer romance. But I do think I like this romance the most out of all of her books. I just didn't really care that much. I liked more of the subplot in her book, but yeah. Then I read The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This is their newest release, and it follows Theo and Kit, who are childhood best friends. Theo is like an aspiring sommelier. They want to work with wine and stuff like that, and they are currently a bartender. Kit is like a pastry chef, but before this, they were childhood best friends. In their teenhoods, I don't remember the age, but they realized they had feelings for one another and that they wanted to be together. So they started dating, they moved in together, and they have like those like similar tastes in like food and drinks. So they decided to book a trip and go like wine and food tasting all around Europe. And something happens at the airport that causes them to have a disagreement. They have a huge fight, and they end up saying a lot of things that they shouldn't be saying, and they end up parting ways and breaking up. They don't see each other for 4 years until they have 1 month left to renew the voucher for the trip they canceled, and they end up going at the same time. Neither of them knows they're going to be there, but they show up, get on the bus, and they're both on the same trip. So it kind of follows them trying to rekindle their friendship, but there's obviously like this tension. And I do think the tension was good. I just think that the emotional development in this book for like them as characters and them like as a couple was not that good. I feel like it was more focused on like the spicy aspect of that and like the physical tension. And while I do think that part was well written, I am more drawn to like an emotional romance, so I just don't think this was for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I do think it was very good. I would recommend it to people who like more like spicy romances. Then I ended up reading Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This started my Throne of Glass reading journey. I'm going to be putting out a Throne of Glass reading vlog, so I'm not going to talk too in depth about this, but I gave this a 4 stars. It was entertaining. The writing kind of got me a little bit. It took me out just a teeny bit because it was very like generic, I guess. I don't know. It was like very young adult, and this is a young adult book. Like it is mostly a young adult series, so it makes sense. It also makes sense because Sarah J. Maas wrote it when she was 16. So in that aspect, it does make sense, and I'm not trying to fault her for that. I just feel like it did lower my rating a little bit. It took me out of the story, and I do feel like a lot of things weren't developed as much as they could have been or they should have been. If you don't know what this is about, I feel like most people should go into this series blind if you're planning to read it, but I mean, there's so many spoilers online. I've been trying to like avoid them like the plague, but it follows Selena. She is an assassin, and she's been stuck in a labor camp for like the past year But one day, the Crown Prince of Adarlan and his like royal captain of the King's Guard or something like that, I don't even remember, comes and they bring her to the castle, and there they tell her that she's supposed to compete in these trials to become the King's champion, or like the King's royal assassin basically, and eventually obtain her freedom. So it kind of follows that. It follows her trials, her relationships with the people around her, and everything like that. I did not feel connected to any of the characters in this book. It honestly took a couple of books for me to get there, which you'll see if you watch the vlog that comes out soon. But I do think it was entertaining. I think the trial aspect was like the only part that like made me super intrigued to this, but like it was like a huge part of the story. I just think that it could have been dragged out a little bit more because I do feel like the pacing was a little bit too fast at times. Then I ended up taking a break and reading Our Wives Under the Sea. If you don't know what this is about, it's basically a literary horror. It follows Mary and Leah. Leah, I think she's like a marine biologist. She is supposed to go on this trip, and it's supposed to be 2 weeks in a submarine. They're supposed to go with a team and go down and, I don't know, like study it. But it ends up going wrong. They end up getting stranded on the ocean floor and not returning for like, I think 6 months. When she ends up returning, she is very different. She's very changed, and Mary kind of sees these changes, and their relationship is very strained because it's not like how it used to be. Leah is like kind of like a shell of a person, and I do think that it's a very interesting premise. I do think I would have rated this maybe a lot higher if the book had like an entire second part where Mary was kind of like trying to take down the corporation that Leah was like working for, but it honestly just felt like an incomplete story to me. I didn't really connect to it or the characters. I do think Mary's point of view was very interesting. She's kind of a cynical character, and that was like very refreshing to read about, and it's not all like glitz and glam, but it was interesting. I just don't think that I like cared too much about what was happening. I know this is supposed to be more like commentary on like grief and relationships and stuff, and I do understand it from that point of view, but I just don't think like as a story I was super intrigued. I wasn't like surprised by anything that happened, and it wasn't like scary. I don't know if it was supposed to be like more psychological horror than like actual horror, but none of it like, I just really didn't care, to be honest. If this was like not sapphic, then I probably would have stopped reading it just because I feel like nothing was happening. I read this one Goodreads quote, and I'm gonna put it on the screen because I feel like it perfectly embodied the entire story. Like that's literally all I read about. But I just don't think it was for me personally. It was a bit of a letdown, but if you enjoy it, like, reading is subjective. Just because I didn't have a good experience with it doesn't mean you won't. After reading that, I went back into the Throne of Glass world and read Crown of Midnight. Honestly, this was my least favorite book in the Throne of Glass series so far. I gave this 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It just felt like a complete filler book, but yeah, I'm not going to talk about this too in depth. It was a 3-star, felt like a filler book. Nothing really happened. I don't feel like there was too much character development. I just didn't really care about much happening in this book. After that, I read The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. This is Anthony Bridgerton's story with Kate Sharma, or I think in this one it's Kate Sheffield. But I really enjoyed this at the beginning, but the more I went on, the more Anthony talked and the more annoying he got. He is just very annoying, very like egotistical, very alpha male kind of like acting, and I just really didn't enjoy that. I feel like he treated Kate like crap, to be honest. I feel like the men in a lot of Julia Quinn's books, just like when I read about them, I get the ick. I'm just like grossed out, and I don't see how the main character could put up with that. But overall, I do think it was like interesting. There were some scenes that weren't entertaining, but overall, Anthony's character in this was just like kind of abominable. I didn't enjoy his character at all. I'm very glad that they changed the men in the shows because I literally would not be watching that show. So then I read Gwen Art Are Not in Love. If you've never heard of this, it follows Arthur and Gwendolyn. They are betrothed, and they have been since they were kids. It is about time for them to start getting like their nuptials done, like get married. So Arthur has to come stay at Camelot, which is where Gwen lives, for the summer, and within like 24 hours, Gwen finds Arthur kissing a man, and then Arthur finds Gwen's diary and finds out that she has a crush on like a lady knight of the court, and they kind of like develop a friendship and are like, oh, let's just fake like being happy together, because they really don't like each other, but they're like, let's just fake being happy so that we can do our own thing separately. I gave this a 2 stars. I honestly just feel like nothing happened. Like, stuff happened at the end, but I didn't even care because I feel like the characters were not built up. The plot was like non-existent. Like, I just didn't see like why any of the characters liked each other, like more than a friendship basis. So I just didn't enjoy it. I don't think it was for me personally. I just feel like nothing really happened. I was very into royalty, I guess, this month, so I did end up trying to get through more books on my physical TBR that involved royalty, and I read books 4 and 5 in the selection series. These are like the spin-off novels following the main character's daughter named Edelyn. She is like the future queen of Irlandia or something like that. And I honestly just didn't really like these books. The Heir I rated 3 stars, The Crown I rated 2 stars. The main character was insufferable. She is super annoying, she's super spoiled, and she just like doesn't think about others. She's like always like in her own head, like, oh, my life is so hard to be the queen, but like I can't believe those poor people who are suffering are like mad at me for that. Stuff like that. And she's just like very annoying. And she kind of is just like, oh, poor me a lot of the time. And she's just kind of rude to everyone. But in the Heir, we basically follow her as she is being forced into a selection as a distraction to the company because her father disbanded the caste system that they had, which was like, I think 1 through 8 or something like that. And it was kind of basically your social standing because the selection books are like dystopian. There is outrage because the caste being disbanded after they've been in place so long is problematic for like a lot of people because they're like, oh, well, I used to be a 2 and now I'm getting treated the same as like a 7, and then the 7s are like, well, I'm not getting as many opportunities even though the caste system is disbanded. So in order to distract, I guess, the country, they want to hold a selection. It's like a dumb reasoning in my opinion. I honestly don't think these books needed to be like a thing. If you haven't seen the selection series, I probably should have said it. It's kind of like The Bachelor, but like with the crown prince, and in this one it's the crown princess and she's holding like a selection. So it's like The Bachelorette, a bunch of like eligible people like put their thing in, they get drawn out of hat, and they can come to the castle and get to know the princess and have a chance of like being her prince consort or whatever. So she has her own selection, it goes fine, none of the men are really that interesting, but it's like kind of like, oh, we kind of know she's gonna end up with this one. And then in book 2 it totally switches up. Now she did end up with the one I wanted her to end up with, but there was like no development ever like for them. Like they were like friends for like 2 scenes and then they were like, oh my god, I love you, and I'm like when did that happen? Overall, like her character in this book was insufferable, and then at the end there was like 3 pages where her character was like redeemed and she learned to not be an annoying person, and then she was fine in this book. I don't know, 3 stars, 2 stars. Wasn't the best. I don't regret reading this, but I kind of do. Then I decided to do a reread of This Is How You Lose the Time War. I read this at the end of last year and I never gave it a rating. I didn't know how to feel, and again, I didn't know how to feel this time, so I didn't give it a rating. I read it like on my Kindle last year, and then this time I tried the audiobook to see if it would like kind of change my feelings. And overall, I just don't think I connect to the story, and I don't really care about the things that are happening. It's about 2 rival agents of like a space-time war and their unlikely correspondence. They start like sending letters back and forth and slowly begin falling for each other. I just like don't really care about like their notes and stuff. Like none of it to me, like maybe I'm just not enough of a romantic to like read this and care too much about it. Like I feel like I said this for Our Wives Under the Sea, but if this was not sapphic I wouldn't have read this. I just didn't find it like super intriguing. I did connect to one of the characters more this time than I did reading it last year, but I just think overall maybe it's not like the book for me. I really wanted to enjoy it because This Is How You Lose the Time War and Our Wives Under the Sea are like beloved in the sapphic reading community, and I just didn't like either of them that much, so it kind of is a bit disappointing. But overall, like if you think the premise sounds interesting, like you should still read it for yourself. It's very quick. These are like 2 short books, but I just don't think for me I cared that much about it. The last book that I read in the month of August was Never Ever Getting Back Together by Sophie Gonzalez. If you've never heard about this, it basically follows this girl named Maya whose ex named Jordy cheated on her 2 years ago. She is now 18, but she feels like she can't escape him like as a person. His sister ended up marrying like the crown prince of this small European country, and he's like always on TV. He's always portrayed as this good guy, and everyone she talks to in her hometown before he like moved was like, oh, he's such a great guy, but no one knows like he did all this stuff to her, and he was like kind of like gaslighting her into thinking that she was crazy and telling everyone she was crazy, and that she was like stalking him, and that he didn't cheat on her, they were broken up, all this stuff. He's not a great guy, but everyone seems to think he is. Editing me here, I just feel like I'll explain it better now, so I'm just gonna insert this clip instead of rolling the other one. But basically, Maya gets a call, it's production, they're like, hey, like we have this new reality show, it's called Second Chance Romance, we'd love for you to come on, it's gonna feature all of Jordy's exes. and basically you guys are just gonna get a second chance to date him. And she's like, of course I don't want that, like he's a douche, like he screwed me over, like no thank you. And then they try and convince her, she says no. And then a couple days later, Jordy calls her. He's like, oh, I really want to see you. She like believes it for like a second, and then she's like, wait, this dude is literally a gaslighter. And then her sister's like, you know what you should do, go on the show and like make him fall in love with you, and then expose him, like humble him, like get this man, make America see who he really is. So that's what she plans to do. She goes on the show, and when she gets there, she realizes Sky, who is the girl that Jordy cheated on her with, is also there. So it kind of follows them and their story. It is a sapphic romance. There's like a lot of drama that goes on. It's super entertaining, but I do think that the pacing was weird, and this book was like miscommunication central. I ended up giving it 3.5. I really do think it would have been higher if they worked out their miscommunication ahead of time. I would still recommend it. It was very interesting. It did have like bisexual representation, but it was also like a huge miscommunication trope, and it kind of annoyed me at points. So yeah, those are all the books that I read in the month of August. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want to do, and I will see you guys in the next video.